There was a school of thought some years ago that Nick Saban would never, ever retire from coaching football because what else would he do? He spent his entire adult life and started even earlier as part of a team. How many times have we heard him tell that story? So he couldn't imagine not being a part of a team. Well, little did he know, and little did we know, that his post-coaching life would be about as interesting and maybe more so than his actual coaching career. Welcome, everyone. I'm Kevin Skarbinski. This is Scarbo Knows, and we have an interesting, arresting new development in the case of who's going to save college football, who's going to save college athletics. Is Nick Saban the guy to do it? It was just a week ago in Tuscaloosa at a special commencement event created because President Donald Trump wanted to participate in a special commencement event at the University of Alabama, where, as you might imagine, he is very well received, whether he shows up for a football game or whether he decides to address the class of 2025. He did that last week. And in a rare move, Nick Saban served as his warm-up act and even joked that he felt like the opening act for the Rolling Stones. Nick Saban gave a really nice, thoughtful address to the graduates himself, very concise, very direct, good advice, and then introduced Donald Trump, who did what he normally does when he speaks in front of crowds. And we're not going to get political here. That's not the point of this show. We are, however, going to arrive at the intersection of politics and sports, which can often be a dangerous place. Nick Saban knows that as well as anyone. I don't know if you guys remember, but the first time Donald Trump was elected president of the United States back in 2016, Nick Saban was the head coach at the University of Alabama. And the day after the election, one of Nick Saban's regular weekly press appearances was on Wednesday after practice. And someone asked for his thoughts on the election's outcome. And he said, and I've got to look at this exact quote because this is pretty amazing in hindsight in particular. To be honest with you, I didn't even know yesterday was election day. It was so important to me that I didn't even know it was happening. Wow. For a man as intelligent as Nick Saban to make a statement such as that, you can imagine there was some serious blowback. And so that Saturday, Alabama played Mississippi State. They beat them by a gazillion. And Nick Saban felt compelled in his post-game press conference to let everybody know that he had not shirked his responsibility. He actually had voted sometime before by absentee ballot because the last thing he wanted to do was step away from a Tuesday practice to go to the polling place because that's their big work day, or was their big work day during practice. So Nick Saban has had some unfortunate encounters with politics in his time. But we've got to fast forward to today and what's happening now. And it's been widely reported now in the last 24 hours. It started after Trump came to Tuscaloosa, met with Saban. Tommy Tuberville, former Auburn football coach, current U.S. Senator he's from Alabama. We're still trying to figure out where exactly he lives, whether it's Alabama or Florida. There seems to be some dispute about that. Really good reporting on that in the Birmingham News on AL.com, where you can find my work twice a week, my sports columns. So they apparently had a conversation about everything that's wrong with college sports. And Tommy Tuberville, on one of his social media accounts, put out this thought: college football is the heart and soul of America, but it's in danger if we don't level the playing field. Now, I don't know about you. I've been following college football, college sports for a long, long time. Someone's going to have to explain to me when the playing field actually was level, because it's not now, nor has it ever been. Just ask Nick Saban. This is the man who won 7 national championships as a head coach, 6 of them at Alabama, 1 at LSU. He won 11 SEC championships, 9 at Alabama, 2 at LSU. He sent countless players into the NFL draft, onto NFL rosters, guys that made tens of millions of dollars because they were developed in Nick Saban's process, the word he uses for his system or used for his system. So the man has been ultra successful. How successful has Nick Saban been? Let's look at the investment that Alabama made in Nick Saban financially when they hired him back in January of 2007, and contrast that with some of the return that the university, the football program, even the city of Tuscaloosa have gained because of their association with Nick Saban. And there you see the number in the graphic, the upper right corner. Now, this is Nick Saban's salary. This doesn't include Aflac commercials, appearing next to the Aflac Duck and Deion Sanders and all the ancillary income that he brought in, his Mercedes-Benz dealerships, etc. This does not include that. This is what Alabama paid Nick Saban from 2007 to 2023 to be the head football coach. Approximately $121 million. That's a lot of money. I can remember Aunt Pity Pats all across the South, all across the country, reaching for their smelling salts back in late 2006, early 2007, as I reported that Alabama was willing to pay Nick Saban $32 million, $4 million a year at 8 years, over 8 years, total of $32 million, which totally reset the salary structure of college football coaching. Seems kind of quaint now with what guys like Kirby Smart and Dan Lanning, et cetera, and Ryan Day are making. But look at that. That's what they spent. But look what they got in return. As I mentioned, 6 national championships, 9 SEC championships. The University of Alabama's enrollment in Nick Saban's time there, annual enrollment increased by 60%. It was at 25,000 and change when he took the job. When he left the job, Alabama just went over 40,000 in enrollment. Think of how much tuition that is. Now, that's not all because of Nick Saban, obviously, nor is the increase in Tuscaloosa's population, which has gone up about 25% from the 2010 census, a few years after Saban got to Tuscaloosa, to 2023, the last estimate. They're over 111,000 in population in Tuscaloosa now. And Walt Maddox, who's the mayor there, he came up with a great phrase. He's a former UAB football player, by the way, and a huge advocate for that program. Walt Maddox called it Sabanomics. And Sabanomics has been very, very good to the city of Tuscaloosa, the University of Alabama football program, athletic department, as well as to Nick Saban. So Nick Saban has a business background. He is not just a football coach. A lot of football coaches can't tell you the first thing. They couldn't balance a checkbook, but they know football. Well, Nick Saban is schooled in subjects far beyond how to play defense, how to slow down an offense, how to recruit a winning quarterback, how to develop that quarterback, etc. So in a lot of ways, it makes sense for Nick Saban to be co-chair of this new presidential commission on college athletics. Again, it's been widely reported that he is going to be the co-chair. Now, what is at odds to me and what I questioned, and I questioned it in more sarcastic tones in a column that appears today in the Birmingham News. You can find that online on my X account at Kevin Skarbinski. You'll find a link to it. And I referenced the late, great Mike Leach. And I don't know if you guys remember, but a few years ago, before he went to Mississippi State, when Mike was still at Washington State, and the college football playoff came into existence, and they put together a committee to choose the teams that would be in the playoff. And this was when it was a 14 playoff. And Mike went off on an epic soliloquy full of sarcasm when he said, America loves committees. Let's get us a committee. Who's going to be on the committee? Well, how about this guy? He's a nice guy. Let's put him on the committee. What's this committee going to do? Well, we're going to meet at a resort. We're going to hang out together. We're going to eat nice meals. We're going to talk about things. And maybe some of these people on the committee don't really have any knowledge or insight or inside information. Maybe they've never been involved in college football, but we're going to let these people choose the 4 teams that play in the college football playoff. And again, that was some years ago. But Mike was spot on about the idea of committees. I looked it up on the NCAA website. There are more than 170 committees across the NCAA. They cover a lot of subjects. There is, for example, maybe the most famous committee, the NCAA Division I Men's Basketball Committee, otherwise known as the Selection Committee. That's the group that puts the teams in the field every year in the NCAA tournament. That's the group that seeds the field, brackets the field, and you could disagree with the last 4 in, who got in, who didn't, but what you can't disagree with is that, and this is why it's the best postseason in sports, every team that's capable of winning 6 games to win a national championship is in that field. And you can give that committee a lot of pats on the back this year because 4 number 1 seeds all got to the Final Four. And Florida, of course, ended up winning the national championship. So kudos to them. But there are more than 170 NCAA committees. And those committees have different tasks and different responsibilities, different members. But no committee that has ever been constructed has yet found a sensible, practical solution to the professionalization of college sports. Now, what's interesting is, going back to Nick Saban being the co-chair of this committee, not long before he retired, and these two events are not unrelated. You know, Nick and his wife, Terry, he calls her Miss Terry. Everyone calls her Miss Terry. One of the nicest people you'll ever meet. Always enjoyed spending time with her. I had her as a guest on a radio show some years ago. And they were talking what they used to do on recruiting weekends. While Nick would be hanging out with the players who were at his house, Terry would meet with the moms. And often the moms were on these visits. And she said to Nick, this is, again, not that long ago, a year or so ago, right before he retired, "Why are we doing this?" And Nick said, "What do you mean?" And Terry said, "You know, when I would meet with the moms for years and years and years, they would always want to know, how are we going to help their young men grow? How are we going to help them develop as football players? Yes, but also as people, as students, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera." And she said, now all they're asking about is how much money they're going to make. Nick Saban told that story. He's told it on a number of occasions. He told it in an appearance before Congress, one of many appearances by one of many people trying to solve this conundrum of how you keep the heart and soul of college athletics while allowing it to be professionalized, which was inevitable, which the NCAA buried itself in the sand in trying to get out ahead of for decades and decades. And as Charles said in the comments, and by the way, if you have any questions or comments, please let them pop them in there, and we'll either discuss them, or if you have any questions, I'll try to answer them. Government involvement in college sports will likely be a disaster. Amen, Charles Todd Sullivan. Amen. And I'm not as concerned. I'm glad, to be honest, that Nick Saban is, if there's going to be such a thing as a presidential commission on college athletics, it's going to try to figure out how to put together a more fair and equitable system that meets everyone's needs. And there are so many different constituencies here, and I hope they don't leave out the players, by the way. That's part of the reason that we're in the mess we're in, because for a long time, the players were the last group on the list that was considered, their needs, their wants, their contribution to the enterprise, and their return on their investment, their physical, mental time investment in making college football, college basketball, et cetera, what they are, and so as popular as they are. But all of these times that Nick Saban, Greg Sankey, the SEC commissioner, all of these other leaders throughout college athletics have gone to Capitol Hill. They've met with senators like Tommy Tuberville from Alabama/Florida, like Ted Cruz from Texas. They have yet to come up with a single bill. They have discussed bills. They've put together proposed bills. They've never actually gotten one passed. I don't know that they've ever actually voted on one. I can't recall them actually voting on one. So what makes anyone think at a time of chaotic change in America that those guys who obviously have far more important things on their plate than how much money the Texas roster is going to cost for the 2025 football season, how are those guys going to solve this probably unsolvable problem? But Nick Saban, who said, again, why are we doing this? And shortly thereafter, after his wife asked him that question, guess what? He decided to retire. And a big part of the reason he decided to retire was because he didn't like the system as it is currently constituted. He didn't like that when Alabama lost to Michigan in what turned out to be his last game as the Alabama head coach, in the Rose Bowl, the college football playoff semifinal, the last year of the 4-team playoff, when they got back to Tuscaloosa, Nick Saban suddenly had a lot of people knocking at his door. And those people that were knocking at his door were players like the elite safety Caleb Downs, who had an incredible freshman season that year for Alabama. And what those guys wanted to know is what Terry Saban told her husband, Nick, that a lot of their moms and family members and parents wanted to know. How much am I going to make next season? More so, not only how much am I going to make, here's what I need to make to return to Alabama next year. And that became an incredible frustration for Nick Saban. Here he is. He wants to be a football coach. Now he's playing general manager like he's back in the NFL. He wasn't a GM in the NFL, but he was certainly involved in personnel decisions in his short tenure with the Miami Dolphins. He didn't want to be a general manager. He didn't want to worry about how much money you have to pay Caleb Downs to get him to come back. Well, obviously, Alabama didn't pay him enough because he moved on to Ohio State and helped them win the last national championship. So Nick Saban didn't like the way college football is built right now. So now he is going to have a voice in what may or may not be. This may be one of those groups. Again, shout out to the late, great Mike Leach, that just meets and they have a lot of discussions and they hang out for a while and they come up with these ideas, but ultimately it goes nowhere. They solve nothing. They spend money that could have been better used elsewhere. But Nick Saban may not be the most interesting person who reportedly is going to serve as co-chair of this Presidential Commission on College Athletics. And don't you love the fact that it's not a committee, it's a commission? It sounds like a committee on steroids. It sounds like a dressed up, fancified committee, this commission. But here's the gentleman who's going to be the co-chair. Now, if you're like me, and I follow college sports fairly closely and have for a long, long time, until the last 24 hours, I had never heard of Cody Campbell. That's the man you see on the screen. He is the head of the Texas Tech Board of Regents. He is a billionaire. He founded the Texas Tech Collective, known as the Matador Club. And by the way, if you follow the transfer portal, which is, again, and certainly is an issue and needs to be reined in and needs to have better regulation and more consistent guardrails, because you don't see NFL free agency during the NFL playoffs. You don't see NBA free agency during the NBA playoffs, but you do see it in college football and college basketball while the season is still going on. Guys are changing teams. That's ludicrous. That's got to change. But Cody Campbell, you see that there is a headline of an article on that graphic. That is an article. That's the headline on an article Cody Campbell wrote for a publication called The Federalist. Now, I'm not a legal eagle. I didn't go to law school. I occasionally have played lawyer in my columns and my commentary through the years. But he wrote a number of articles since January on college athletics for The Federalist, an area that I didn't know that publication ever dabbled in. But check out the headline on this January article written by Cody Campbell. Only Congress and the president can save college sports. And the man who holds that opinion, the man who wrote that article, is going to reportedly serve as co-chair of this presidential commission on college athletics, which tells me or gives me very little confidence that this commission is going to accomplish anything of value, anything of note that doesn't result in trying to rein in the amount of money that players are making without doing the same thing for what coaches are making. And Cody Campbell, and here's another problem with this idea of a commission, okay? Some of his ideas from some of these articles that I read are what college athletics needs to do, and I think a lot of people would actually agree with this, is get back to geographically intelligent conferences where USC and Rutgers are not in the same league, where Stanford and Cal are not in a conference with Duke and North Carolina. That does make a lot of sense. But he went on to say in one of these articles for The Federalist, and you can find them, you can Google them yourself, and they're quite fascinating reading. But this does not sound like a guy who has the player's best interest at heart. Now, I should add, Cody Campbell is a former college football player. He played on the offensive line for Texas Tech for 4 years. He was a 4-year letterman. He was good enough to spend a couple of years in the NFL with the Indianapolis Colts. So he does have a frame of reference where athletes are concerned. But Cody Campbell is also a competitor. You don't become a billionaire without becoming a competitor, without being a competitor. You don't make the kind of money he's made and earn the kind of positions he's earned. Again, he is the chairman of the Board of Regents at Texas Tech without being a competitor. And by the way, Texas Tech, they had made a concerted decision going into the December transfer portal. They were going to go all in on improving their team. They went 8-5 last year. They were the only team to beat the two teams that made the Big 12 championship game. But they were going to go all in. They were going to do everything they could to compete for a Big 12 championship and a spot in the 12-team playoff in 2025. So they went in with a plan to spend $5 million in the portal. They spent more than 10. And they landed what ESPN ranked as the number 2 overall transfer portal class in that December period. So Cody Campbell's a competitor. Nick Saban is a competitor. And what gets lost when you put together a commission like this is, who does Cody Campbell represent? Who does Nick Saban represent? Is it the players? Is it schools like Alabama, traditional powers that have won multiple national championships? Is it an up-and-comer, a wannabe like Texas Tech, where Mike Leach did great work back in the day? Who are they representing? Where does their heart really lie? That's what I question. And on top of all of this, could the timing be worse? Because there happens to be another train on another track nearing the station where college athletics and its future is concerned. It's called the House v. NCAA case. It is before District Judge Claudia Wilkin. The two sides representing players, former players, versus the NCAA, the Power Four conferences, and the NCAA. That case is very close to completion. They already have a settlement agreement. Judge Wilkin had a serious issue with the fact that they didn't include grandfathering in roster limits, which is one of the new wrinkles if this system is put in place, if the judge approves this agreement. So she told them last month, go back to the drawing board, show me you're going to protect the interests of walk-ons who are going to lose their spots as college football goes down to 105 roster spots, each of which can receive a scholarship. But obviously, schools have way more than 100. The bigger schools have more than 105 guys on the football team, and many of them are walk-ons. Well, under this 105 roster limit, some of those guys are going to lose their spots. Some already have. Some have transferred as a result. And Judge Wilkins said, you need to take care of these athletes. There are partial scholarship athletes in other sports that need to be taken care of. So what they did, they went back to the drawing board and they decided, again, this was reported in the last 24 hours, that they are going to make it voluntary for schools to grandfather in these athletes who would have lost their roster spots. In other words, you can have more than 105 on your football roster. Some of that, they will be walk-ons, but you don't have to cut them. And again, they were already trying to implement the parameters of this new agreement. So schools got out ahead of this. They told athletes, they told recruits, sorry, we're not going to have a spot for you next year. People transferred as a result. So we'll see if the judge will go along with this voluntary approach that schools can exceed roster limits for athletes that are already on campus, or for recruits that they may have promised a spot on a roster and then taken that spot away because of these roster limits. We'll see how the judge reacts to that. Because, by the way, if she rejects it, if she thinks voluntary is not enough, if she doesn't trust, and imagine that, not trusting college athletic departments to do the right thing. If she doesn't trust that these voluntary limits will actually work, or these voluntary grandfathering in of current student athletes who may or may not be on scholarship, if she doesn't trust that they will actually implement that, then, hoo boy. If she rejects the settlement agreement, the next step is going to court. And that's the last thing the NCAA wants, because the NCAA's record in court is about as good as the Washington Generals against the Harlem Globetrotters. So that is going on right now. And that agreement, which will usher in, if implemented, not only roster limits, it will usher in revenue sharing in which schools will pay the players directly up to $20.5 million. That's the round figure that's been used. It's a portion of revenue. It's a percentage of revenue that schools will be able to pay directly to their student athletes. So that's the for play part of this. And on top of that, you can make your NIL money. Bryce Young can do a Dr. Pepper commercial. Quinn Ewers can do a Dr. Pepper commercial. And they can make whatever the market value of that is. But now there's going to be some oversight, allegedly, that will look at every one of these deals, $600 or more. It's going to be a big oversight board to look at all these deals. If that's the bottom threshold, $600 or more, to make sure that they are actually meeting market value, that your star quarterback's not going down to your local car dealer, signing autographs for 2 hours and making, I don't know, $500,000 for that. That's not market value. Okay. So that's happening right now. The very structure of college athletics is about to change starting July 1st if that federal judge in California approves this House settlement. And she's already approved and said she agrees with the rest of the settlement. Her issue, again, is the grandfathering in of athletes under the roster limit rule that's coming on board. So why are we initiating, putting together a presidential commission on college athletics to deal with the very issues that the House settlement deals with? Revenue sharing, NIL regulation, roster limits, etc. Why do we need a committee or a commission or any other body of like-minded, well-meaning, thoughtful, educated, experienced adults to spend their time remaking the wheel that's already under reconstruction. I don't get it. I don't like it. And I don't expect that for all of the brain power that Nick Saban and Cody Campbell and whoever else is on this commission will bring to the assignment, I will be shocked. Not shocked, not shocked in the way that Inspector Renault was in Casablanca. I'm shocked to know that gambling is going on in Rick's. Not shocked in that sarcastic sense, but actually shocked if this commission accomplishes anything. I wish them all the best. I wish you all the best. I thank you so much for hanging out with me today as we discuss what college athletics may or may not look like when football season begins, which is what we're all anticipating. We all can't wait for coming up in August. Yeah. And then when the games begin as well. So I'm Kevin SCARBINSKI. This is Scarbo Knows. Thank you to executive producer Brendan Martin from the SEC Sideline Sports Network for making this all possible. Thank you for listening. Check out my work in the Birmingham News on AL.com and other places. Follow me on Twitter/X at Kevin SCARBINSKI and get all that stuff. Hope you guys have a great day. See ya.